Before there were stories, before there were cities, before there was even a word for time, there was only water. Not the crashing, foaming water of a stormy sea, but a slow, endless, quiet ocean of darkness. In the deep below, fresh water gathered in invisible underground lakes and rivers. The ancients called this hidden ocean Apsu. Above it, stretching without shore or horizon, lay the heavy, salty body of the primeval sea, which they named Tiamat. Apsu below, Tiamat above, fresh and salt, cool and heavy. Two vast, sleeping presences, their waters mingling in the dark. There was no sky, no earth, no sun, no moon to count the hours. There were no hours to be counted. All was dim and unbroken. No wind moved, no bird cut through the air, because there was no air yet to carry a wing. There was only the weight of water and the slow, almost imperceptible movement of the deep. If you listen with the part of your mind that hears what is older than sound, you might notice it. Not a crash, not a wave, just the gentle, continuous mixing of fresh and salt, of Apsu and Tiamat, folding into one another like a long breath, drawn in and never released. In that vast and patient stillness, something began to stir. Where Apsu's coolness rose up to meet the quiet, salty heaviness of Tiamat, small ripples formed, currents within currents, eddies within eddies, places where the water moved just a little differently than it had before. From these first tiny differences, from these first soft stirrings, the earliest gods emerged. They rose not in a flash, not in a thunderclap, but the way silt slowly settles on the floor of a river. Slowly, eventually, almost unnoticeably. First came Lamu and Lahamu, figures as old and formless as the mud at the bottom of the deep. No temples bore their names yet, no hymns called to them, because there were no humans to sing, no cities to build temples, no walls to echo the sound of worship. They simply existed, like the first shapes that appear when your eyes begin to adjust to a darkened room. From them came Anshar and Kishar, horizon and earth, the hints of above and below, the first notion that there could be a separation between what is high and what is low. Still, there was no sky arched over the world, no ground spread out beneath it. There was only the idea of such things, sleeping in the minds of these new gods. Slowly, ever so slowly, as if each movement took 1,000 years, more forms gathered into being. Anu, the bright one of the heights, began to take shape out of possibility. Below, in the deep of the deep, where cool waters were thick and still, another mind awakened. Ea, whom the Sumerians called Enki, the god of wisdom and of the subterranean waters. He stirred as if from a long sleep, opening his eyes not on a sky, but on the quiet pressure of the deep ocean around him. No light flickered there. The only glow was the inner clarity of his own awareness. He listened. He listened to the mingling of Apsu and Tiamat. He listened to the quiet current of thought running through this unborn universe. He understood that all this darkness, all this silence, all this formless water was not emptiness, it was possibility. Everything that would one day exist, every mountain, every reed, every city wall, every human breath, slept within this hush. Imagine it for a moment, a universe with no edges, no up, no down, no before, no after. Just the gentle sway of water and the deep velvet quiet of a world not yet divided into night and day. The first gods moved very little. There was nowhere to go, but slowly, with the patience of stone forming miles beneath the earth, they began to dream of order. They dreamed of a place above, clear and wide. They dreamed of a place below, solid and firm. They dreamed of boundaries and paths, of rivers that could be followed, of stars that could be counted. Their dreams gathered like mist. Soft outlines formed around ideas of heaven and earth, like the faintest suggestions of a coastline seen far away in the dark. But for now, it was still only water and only silence, a silence so complete and so gentle that it did not feel empty at all, but full, full of what could be, full of what would be, full of the stories still waiting to be spoken. In this slow and ancient darkness, with Apsu below, Tiamat above, and the first gods barely awake in between, the stage was set for something entirely new. Not yet for humans, not yet for cities, not yet for kings or scribes or tablets of clay. First, there would be work. Long after the first gods had opened their eyes in the quiet waters of the deep, the universe began to take shape. A sky was stretched like a dome, and earth was laid out like a great plain. Rivers were planned, mountains were imagined, valleys were traced in thought before they were ever carved in soil. But a world does not keep itself. Water does not always flow where it should. Fields do not prepare themselves. Even in the oldest stories, order requires effort. The greater gods, the Anunnaki, lords of heaven and earth, did not wish to do this work alone. So they called upon the younger gods, the Igigi, to shape the world. The Igigi were many, hosts of shining beings, less exalted than the highest gods, but powerful beyond anything that would ever walk the earth. They were given a task. They were to dig the great canals that would one day feed the fields. They were to open the beds of the Tigris and Euphrates, guiding water from the mountains in the north down through the wide plains of the south. For without rivers and canals, the land would be barren, and without that work, no seed could grow and no city could rise. And so the Igigi began to labor. In the beginning, their work had a kind of rhythm, like a chant. They lifted earth in great baskets, full of wet soil and broken stone. They stepped down into the raw channels where water would one day flow. They carved, they dredged, they cleared. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. Day after day, through heat and through darkness, their movements repeated, over and over, until the work itself became a kind of music. The sun, still new in the sky, watched their efforts in silence. It rose over half-finished canals, over piles of fresh-cut earth, over long lines of divine workers moving earth from one place to another. Under that light, the air above the plain shimmered with heat. The smell of wet clay rose from the open channels. The sound of tools biting into soil, of stones being dragged, of water tested and redirected, filled the landscape. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. At night, the stars came out, and still the Igigi worked. Torches burned along the edges of their growing waterways, small points of fire under an enormous, unfamiliar sky. The air cooled, the scent of damp earth thickened. Insects whispered in the reeds that were just beginning to take root. The Igigi's footprints pressed into the mud, only to be washed away by the first cautious flows of water. Years passed, then decades, then longer than any human mind can hold. The stories say that for 40 years the Igigi labored without rest. 40 years of digging and carrying, of shaping and lifting, of moving earth and water to match the plans of the higher gods. Time for them did not tick in seconds. It moved in larger measures, in the slow deepening of a canal, in the steady lowering of a hill, in the gradual greening of a plain. Still, even for gods, there is a limit. The work grew heavier. The joy of creation dulled into repetition. The rhythm that had once been music became a weight in their limbs. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. The basket seemed to grow heavier. The soil clung more stubbornly to the sides of the channels. The nights stretched longer, but offered no extra rest. Under the glare of the sun, the Igigi felt the heat press down like a hand. Under the glow of the moon, their shadows stretched thin and tired along the banks of the unfinished works. In the quiet moments, as they paused and leaned on the handles of their tools, they began to murmur. At first, it was only a few voices, soft as wind through reeds. Is there no end? Is there no rest? Will we always carry the basket? But murmurs spread. One weary god looked to another and saw the same heaviness in their shoulders. Always digging, always lifting, always shaping the world for those who sit above. The work went on because it had to. Without their labor, the rivers would fall silent. Without the rivers, the land would dry. Without the land, there could be no offerings, no temples, no songs. Still, with each passing age, the words of the Igigi grew less like questions and more like a decision. At sunset, when the sky over the plain softened into copper and deep blue, the gods would stand at the edges of the canals they had made. They would watch the slow, patient water beginning to move through the channels they had carved. They would look at the earth piled high in mounds, the embankments rising like low walls, marking the shape of a world in progress. The work was beautiful. It was also unending. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. Under starlight, under sunlight, in heat and in darkness, the Igigi labored. Above them, in palaces of light, the great gods watched.
They saw the channels deepening, the rivers finding their courses, the fields beginning to catch and hold moisture and life. But they did not feel the ache in the arms of the workers. They did not taste the grit of soil at the back of the throat. They did not know the dull numbness that comes when every day is the same motion, repeated 1,000 times. The Igigi knew, and in the deep, quiet places of their thoughts, a new idea began to form. An idea as simple and as powerful as a seed. It was the thought that they could put their tools down.
There comes a moment, even in the longest labor, when continuing feels impossible. For the Igigi, that moment arrived on a night like many others. The sun had set, leaving the sky clear and dark. The canals they had carved held water that glimmered softly under the light of the stars. The half-built embankments cast long, sleeping shadows. The air was cooler than it had been in the day, but it carried the same smell of damp earth and river silt. One by one, then in twos and in small groups, the Igigi finished their day's work and did not pick up their tools again. Where a shovel had stood, leaning against a pile of earth, it slid down into the dust and lay there, silent. Where baskets had been kept in neat stacks, ready for the morning's loads, they were left scattered, some overturned, their woven sides catching the starlight. No one called them back to work. No foreman's voice rang out over the half-finished projects. Only the small sounds of the night, the whisper of reeds, the murmur of moving water, the distant cry of some ancient bird filled the spaces where metal had struck earth for so many years. Far from the canal banks, in a place where the field rose slightly and the land was dry and firm, the Igigi began to gather. At first, it was a cluster of a few. Then more arrived, then more. They came without shouting. They came without song. They came without the music of drums or flutes or cymbals, for this was not a celebration. It was a decision given shape. Torches were lit, one by one, small flames blooming against the dark. The light touched their faces, showing the weight of ages in their eyes. They stood together, silent, each god holding the same thought: we are tired. Around them, the world they had built lay quiet. The unfinished edges of canals and embankments waited in stillness, as if listening. In the high dwelling of Enlil, Lord of the wind and of the air, all had been peaceful. The work below had gone on for so long that it seemed part of the structure of the cosmos, as expected as the rising of the sun. Now, something had changed. From their gathering place, the Igigi turned as one and began to move. They walked not toward the fields and not toward the rivers, but toward the great temple of Enlil himself. It was a night march. Under the moon, their footsteps made a soft, steady sound on the earth. Not a stampede, not a rush, a measured, continuous tread, like a heartbeat moving steadily toward a decision. The torches they carried flickered in the night air. Seen from a distance, it might have looked like a slow river of fire winding across the plain. They said little. There was no need. Every god in that company knew why they walked. They had lifted the earth. They had carved the rivers. They had shaped the channels through which life would flow. and now they were empty. Now they were tired. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. The rhythm still lived in their muscles, but their hands had let the tools fall. The great temple of Enlil rose above the plain, a dark shape against the lighter darkness of the sky. Its steps led up and up toward a sanctuary where the Lord of Air and Authority watched over all. As the Igigi approached, their flames multiplied at the base of the structure. They surrounded the temple, torches held high, encircling the dwelling of Enlil with a ring of quiet fire. They did not storm the doors, they did not cry out, they simply stood, hundreds of divine workers who had laid down their tools and raised up light instead. Inside, the stillness of the night was broken. The Anunnaki, higher gods, sensed the disturbance, and Leo, feeling the presence of so many gathered below, asked what had brought them. Word reached him, the Igigi had stopped their work. They had burned their tools. They had surrounded his temple in the dark of night. Their complaint was simple. It could be summed up in one quiet thought: we are tired. Enlil's first feeling was anger. The order of the cosmos had been interrupted. The fields, the rivers, the careful plans of the higher gods all depended on the constant, faithful labor of these younger gods. Without their work, water would falter, earthworks would erode, the delicate balance between flood and drought would waver. He thought of punishing them. He thought of striking them down for their defiance. But the situation was not so simple. The Anunnaki gathered in council. Anu, Lord of the Sky, took his place. Enlil, Lord of Air, stood heavy with responsibility. And from the deep, with the calm of someone who has already considered what others have just realized, Enki, Ea, came to speak. He listened to the report of the revolt. He listened to the words of the Igigi, their quiet insistence that they could no longer bear the load. He looked not only at the order that had been broken, but also at the work that had been done. He saw the channels cut through stubborn earth. He saw the mountains slightly lowered, the plains slightly raised. He saw the pattern of rivers taking shape, ready to sustain life. And he saw the workers, their strength worn thin by the repetition of ages. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. There in the council of the gods, an idea took form. It was an idea as gentle as a thought and as powerful as a river changing course. What if, he said, the burden could be shared? What if there were another kind of being, one made to work the earth, to carry the basket, to tend the canals and fields, so that the Igigi might rest? A murmur passed through the divine assembly. Another being, not God and not beast, something in between. A creature of earth, yet touched by the essence of the divine, able to hold tools, to learn patterns, to feel the weight of work, and to continue it. A mortal, born and dying, generation after generation, carrying on the tasks set before them. To the Igigi, this would mean release. To the Anunnaki, it would mean that the world could remain ordered without burning out the strength of their younger kin. The Anunnaki considered. There were questions. Who would shape this new being? What material would it be made from? What would bind it to its task? Enki, whose thoughts moved like underground water, already had part of the answer. The earth holds clay, and clay holds shape well.
Let us take clay from the deep places where sweet water flows, from the Abzu, and mix it with the life of a god. Let the wise birth goddess, Nintu, whom the Sumerians also call Ninma, shape this clay. Let her form bodies, and let our own divine essence be bound within them. They will be of the earth, but also of us. They will bear the work that we no longer can. The idea settled over the council like a veil. A new creature, a new pattern, a new way for the world to be maintained. Slowly, the gods agreed. The strike of the Igigi had not broken the world. It had opened the door to something the universe had not yet known. The age of divine workers alone was ending. The age of humans was about to begin.
Far from the torches that circled Enlil's temple, far from the half-finished canals and the murmuring reeds, there was a deeper place. It was a realm beneath the earth, where the cool, fresh waters of the Abzu flowed in darkness. Here, in a chamber that no human eyes would ever see, Enki prepared the place where a new kind of being would be made. The chamber was quiet. Drips of water fell from the stone above into shallow pools below, each drop echoing softly, marking a kind of slow, liquid time. The walls glistened with moisture. In the dimness, the air was cool and dense, filled with the scent of wet stone and raw earth. At the center of this space, a basin had been carved into the ground. Within it lay clay, dark, rich, drawn from a place where earth and the deep waters of the Abzu met. The clay was heavy and moist, cool to the touch. It held its shape when pressed, yet yielded easily under a guiding hand. Enki stood there, wisdom like a calm light behind his eyes. Beside him came the birth goddess, Nintu, also called Ninma, also called Mummy, the mother of what breathes, the one who shapes and delivers life. She knelt by the basin and touched the clay. It was like touching a thought that had not yet been fully formed, potential, waiting for design. Enki spoke quietly, his voice carrying like a soft current through the chamber. "We will mix this earth with the life of a god," he said, "so that what is formed will have both body and spirit, both matter and awareness." A god was chosen. His name, in some tellings, was Ilawela, a deity of intelligence, of the mind's quick movement. He was sacrificed, not in cruelty, but in a solemn act of transformation. His blood and his flesh were brought to the basin. In some versions of the story, the Igigi themselves added their spittle, a sign that each of them would contribute a portion of their own essence to this new race. The blood mingled with the clay, darkness mixed with darkness. What had been still and heavy took on a quiet warmth. Nintu reached into the basin with both hands, scooping up the sacred mixture. It was cool against her skin, yet threaded through with the faintest stirrings of something more. With slow, deliberate motions, she began to knead the clay. She worked it the way a potter works a vessel, folding, pressing, turning, removing air, smoothing inconsistencies. The sound of her hands moving through the mixture was soft and steady, a gentle rhythm that matched the dripping of the Abzu's waters. Enki watched, his gaze attentive, measuring each gesture.
from the kneaded mass, Nintu took a portion and began to shape it. First, a torso, broad at the shoulders, narrowing toward the waist, rough at first, then smoothed by careful fingers. Then arms, long and capable, ending in hands with fingers separate enough to hold tools, to grip baskets, to touch the world. She shaped legs, strong, able to walk long distances over soil and stone, to wade into canals, to climb embankments. She turned the clay, pressed, smoothed, fixed what was uneven, strengthened what was weak. Finally, she formed a head. The face emerged slowly from the unshaped mass, a brow, eyes closed at first, a nose, cheeks, a mouth. In some versions, Enki spoke the designs of destiny as she worked, assigning purpose and capacity with each feature. Let them stand upright, he might have said, so they can see the horizon and the work before them. Let their hands be clever, so they can plant, harvest, build, and write. Let their minds be bright enough to understand commands, to learn, to remember, and let their lives be bound by time, so that no one of them carries the burden forever, but passes it on to those who follow. When the form was complete, the figure of clay lay still in the dim light. It was a body, perfectly shaped, but not yet alive. Nintu dipped her fingers in the mixture of clay and divine blood and touched the center of the figure's chest. Enki spoke words that no human tongue would ever fully know, words that moved like water and like light. Something shifted. At first, there was only a faint stirring, like the feeling of a breeze in a closed room. Then the chest of the clay figure rose slightly. A first breath, shallow, uncertain, entered the lungs that had never before held air. The heart, made of earth, yet filled with a god's life, gave a small, tentative beat. Then another, then another. Slowly, the eyelids lifted. The first human opened their eyes.
They did not wake to sunlight, to birdsong, to the rustle of leaves. They woke to the cool dimness of the Abzu's chamber, to the sound of water dripping, to the steady gazes of Enki and Nintu. Their gaze was soft, unfocused at first, like that of a newborn. They felt the weight of their own body. They felt the contact of stone beneath them. They felt the cool air touching their skin. They did not know words yet. They did not know what work was, what gods were, what earth was. They knew only that they were awake, that they existed, and that the eyes upon them were full of purpose. Nintu shaped more figures. 7, some stories say, 7 pairs, male and female, so that life would not end with a single generation. Each one was kneaded from the same clay, mixed with the same divine blood. Each one was shaped with care, not rushed, not repeated in haste. Every curl of an ear, every angle of a hand, every contour of a foot was formed by fingers that had shaped gods and destinies before. Some of the figures, legend says, did not come out exactly as intended. One was weak in the legs, another could not see, another could not bear children. Nintu looked at them concerned, but Enki said, "Each will have a place, each will have a role. Even those who cannot labor as others do will belong to the pattern of the world." In those quiet words is the beginning of a deep idea.
that human lives, even when different from the expected shape, are still held within the intention of the divine. When all the forms were shaped and awakened, a small community stood there in the dimness, the first humans. They were bewildered, humble, new. They did not speak yet. They did not yet sing. They listened. The gods looked upon them and saw something neither completely divine nor completely of the mute earth, a bridge between worlds. Enki and Nintu brought them up from the deep chamber to the surface. For the first time, human feet touched open ground. The light of the sun fell upon their faces. The warmth of it was a shock, but not an unwelcome one. Before them stretched the plain, a landscape partly formed, channels cut, embankments raised, water beginning to move along paths designed by divine hands. This would be their world. They would learn the feel of soil crumbling between their fingers. They would learn the sound of water rushing gently through the canals. They would learn the weight of baskets, the curve of tools, the turning of seasons. The Igigi watched. For the first time in a very long while, their hands were empty. They saw these new beings, smaller, more fragile, each life brief compared to theirs, but many in number and capable of learning. The burden that had bent the backs of the younger gods would now be shared by this new race. The gods spoke quietly amongst themselves. Humans will carry the basket. Humans will tend the canals. Humans will bring offerings to our temples. Through their work, the world will remain ordered. So it was decided. The first humans, blinking in the sunlight, stood at the edge of rivers they had not dug, in a land they had not shaped. They did not yet know what was expected of them. But in their hands, in their hearts, in their bones made of clay mixed with divine blood, the capacity for work, for creativity, for memory, for worship was already present. The world waited for their first steps.
With humans to bear the load, the world changed. The Igigi returned to a quieter existence, freed from the endless rhythm of canal and earthwork. The Anunnaki looked down from their high places and watched as a new pattern began to trace itself across the plain. At first, the humans learned slowly. They watched water moving through channels cut long ago by divine effort. They followed its path, noting where it spread and where it pooled, where it nourished and where it eroded. Guided by the gods, they began to shape small fields beside the canals. They pressed seeds into the damp soil, not knowing yet that these small, hard shapes would soften, then split, then rise green and living from the earth. They learned the feel of the plow handle, the weight of the yoke, the pattern of bending and straightening as they tended the first crops. Seasons turned. They learned that after cool and rain came warmth and growth, and after warmth and growth came heat and harvest. Then a time of stillness, then the cycle began again. Their bodies adapted to the work. Lift, step, dig, carry, pour. The pattern was not so different from that of the Igigi, but for humans it was interwoven with the details of daily life. Sharing food at the end of a long day, telling simple stories by firelight, watching children run along the edges of the canals, learning which plants were friendly and which were not. In time,
the scattered huts and shelters near the water drew closer together. A place emerged where paths crossed more often than elsewhere, where people met to exchange grain, to share tools, to speak with one another. Here, the idea of a city began to take root. The Sumerians later said that Eridu was the first. Imagine its beginnings. At the edge of the wetland, where reeds rose tall in the shallows, humans packed mud and straw into bricks. They laid the bricks in rows, one atop another, letting the sun bake them firm. Simple walls rose, then larger ones. Floors were stamped smooth. Doorways appeared, thresholds worn by the first hesitant feet moving in and out. As the generations passed, structures grew more complex. Houses clustered. Storage rooms were built to hold the surplus from good years. At the center, a different kind of building began to rise. It was not a home for humans, but a meeting place between earth and sky, a temple. Its foundation was laid higher than the surrounding land, a raised platform against the ever-present risk of flood. Upon it, walls and rooms took shape, each one measured and aligned according to patterns given by the gods. Over time, layers were added. Platforms stacked upon platforms, a tower of earth and brick ascending step by step. This was the beginning of the ziggurat, a staircase of stone and clay reaching upward, bringing the prayers and offerings of humans closer to the dwellings of the divine. At dawn, the first light of the sun would strike its highest levels, turning their surfaces gold. At dusk, shadows would gather around its base, while its summit still held the day's last glow. From afar, Eridu would have looked like a rising island of brick and intention, surrounded by fields and water, reeds and open sky. Within its boundaries, life unfolded in familiar patterns. Potters turned their wheels, hands steady, shaping vessels for grain and oil and water. Weavers worked at looms, thread shifting under their fingers into cloth. Fishermen went out onto the wide rivers, casting nets, waiting in silence for the subtle pull that signaled a catch. Children played in the dust, tracing lines, learning to recognize marks and signs. In small shaded rooms near the temple, another quiet revolution was taking place. On damp tablets of clay, the first signs of writing appeared.
At first, they were simple marks, records of grain and flocks, lists of offerings, numbers of jars and baskets. But slowly, signs combined, meanings deepened. What had once been spoken only by the mouth and remembered only in the mind began to be pressed into clay. The same material from which humans had been shaped now carried their words. All the while, above Eridu, the sky turned. By day, the sun traced its arc. By night, stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, yet watched with wonder by those who now lay on rooftops, on courtyards, on soft beds of reed and cloth, looking up. They saw shapes in the constellations, figures of gods and heroes, animals and symbols, stories written in points of light. They did not know how vast the universe was, but they knew that there was an order to it, a pattern they could lean upon. In the songs and stories of Sumer, the memory lived on, that there had been a time before humans when the gods worked the earth with their own hands.
that there had been a night when the Igigi had laid down their tools and circled Enlil's temple with quiet fire, that there had been a council, a mixing of clay and blood, a shaping of forms in the damp coolness of the Abzu. They remembered that humans had been created to share the burden of keeping the world in order, to carry the basket, to tend the canals, to maintain the fields, to bring offerings, to tell the stories. You, listening now, are far from Eridu. The canals you know may be highways, wires, lines of light. The tablets you hold may not be clay, but glass. Yet you are still the descendants of those first hands shaped from earth, those first breaths drawn in the dim chamber of the deep. The same stars that once watched the rise of the first city shine above you now, though city lights may blur their edges. The same patterns of work and rest, of effort and release, of burden and relief move through your days. Lift, step, carry, set down, work, then rest. In the oldest stories, even the gods needed rest. Even the divine could grow weary of unending labor. So they made a world in which the burden could be shared. As you feel your own body sink deeper into whatever holds you now, a bed, a chair, a quiet corner, you join a very old rhythm. The ancient workers have put down their tools. The canals they carved are still flowing somewhere in time. The first humans of clay and blood have long since returned to the earth. Their descendants built cities, spoke languages, wrote poems, told stories. You are one of them. Above the ziggurat of Eridu, the night sky deepened, stars wheeling slowly from horizon to horizon. The city grew quiet, lamps were dimmed, voices faded, only the softest sounds remained. Water against stone, wind against reed, a distant murmur of someone singing a child to sleep. In that gentle dark, between the breathing earth and the silent stars, the story of the Anunnaki and the birth of humanity did not end. It simply settled, like silt in a quiet river, layer upon layer, becoming part of the deep bed on which later stories would flow. You can rest now in that same quiet. Let the ancient rivers run in the background of your mind. Let the first city's lights fade to embers. Let the steps of the ziggurat recede into shadow. Above you, as above them, the sky is wide, the stars are patient, time moves slowly, and somewhere, very far back in the memory of the world, clay is still being kneaded, water is still dripping, and the first human heart is still taking its first slow, steady beats.
you.